Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling Robert Cialdini's influence, the psychology of persuasion.
A classic.
It really is.
All right.
And it's packed with insights into how compliance professionals, those people who've got persuasion down to a science,
Right.
how they can basically get us to say yes, even when we don't realize it.
It's pretty fascinating stuff, and sometimes a little unnerving.
Totally. So we're going to break down those sneaky tactics, those levers of influence that Cialdini lays out.
And hopefully help you spot them in the wild.
Exactly. To help us unpack all of this, we've got an expert who can,
Dive deep into the psychology behind it all.
exactly. So to kick things off, where do we even begin with this whole idea of influence?
Well, Cialdini starts with this concept of click-whir, the idea that sometimes we react automatically without really thinking things through.
Kind of like those fixed action patterns he talks about in animals.
Precisely, like with mother turkeys, for example.
Oh yeah, he uses that example.
Just hearing the cheep, cheep sound of baby turkeys triggers this instinctive nurturing behavior in them.
Even if it's not actually their babies, right?
Exactly. They even found that a mother turkey would nurture a stuffed polecat, a natural predator.
No way. Just because it was playing the cheep cheep sound.
It's wild.
Basically, we all have these cheep cheep buttons, so to speak, that can trigger us to act without thinking.
That's the idea. And in this day and age, with information overload and everything moving so fast, well, these shortcuts become even more powerful.
Makes sense. Our brains are probably trying to save energy by going on autopilot.
It's like an efficiency hack, but one that can leave us vulnerable to manipulation.
Especially to those who know how to push our buttons.
Right, exactly. And one of the most powerful buttons they push is the reciprocity rule.
Ah, reciprocity. That's the one where we feel obligated to return a favor. Like Cialdini's example with Joe and the raffle tickets.
Yes. Joe, who just by giving people a free Coke before asking them to buy raffle tickets, doubled his sales.
Even if those people didn't even like him.
Right. It's like that free Coke created this sense of indebtedness. They felt obligated to reciprocate.
Even if it meant spending more money than they intended.
It all comes back to that deep-seated urge to reciprocate.
Right, like we're taught from a young age. Share, say thank you, return favors.
It's ingrained in us. And there's definitely a social pressure to not be seen as someone who takes without giving back.
That makes me think about Diane Louie, the Jonestown resident who survived the mass suicide.
Yes.
She attributed her survival to refusing special favors from Jim Jones.
Because she didn't want to be indebted to him. Wow, powerful example.
Right. But it's not always a bad thing.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Reciprocity is also the basis of cooperation. It can lead to positive outcomes. Think about international relations, for example.
So it's a double-edged sword. It's all about being aware of how it works.
So we can use it for good and avoid being manipulated by it.
Okay, so that's reciprocity. What about rejection, then retreat? That one sounds a little sneaky.
Oh, it is. It's like you ask someone for a huge favor, something outrageous that they're guaranteed to refuse,
Okay.
but then you follow up with a smaller, more reasonable request.
So like, hey, can you watch my pet Komodo dragon for a month? Followed by, well, at least water my plants.
Haha, exactly. And Cialdini did this experiment not with Komodo dragons, but with juvenile delinquents.
Oh, right, I remember that.
He asked students to counsel them for 2 years. Most said no.
Of course.
But then they asked if they would just chaperone the kids on a zoo trip.
And the students who'd gotten that first big request.
3 times more likely to say yes to the zoo trip.
Crazy. But why does it work? Is it like because the person asking makes a concession?
It's likely that. It creates this sense of responsibility, like, oh, they're meeting me halfway, I should too.
Plus, it probably feels good to help out with the smaller task, like you're doing them a favor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got reciprocity, rejection, then retreat. Let's move on to liking. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, we tend to say yes to people we like. Simple as that.
Well, it's a little more nuanced than that. Cialdini dives into all sorts of tactics to actually boost liking.
Ah, so there's more to it.
Oh, yeah. Remember Dealin' Dan, the terrible car salesman?
Oh, yeah. He was so bad at his job, objectively.
But he sold tons of cars. There was something else going on there.
Like he was using some secret weapon?
Well, he probably understood things like the power of physical attractiveness.
The halo effect.
Exactly. That unconscious bias where we think attractive people are also more trustworthy, intelligent, kind, all those good things.
So good looks can make you more persuasive.
Sadly, the research suggests so. But it's not just about looks. We also tend to like people who are similar to us.
Like if they went to the same college or something.
Right. Some companies even train salespeople to subtly mimic their customers, their body language, their speech patterns to create that sense of similarity.
Wow, that's kind of creepy, but effective, I guess.
And then, of course, there are compliments.
Who doesn't love a good compliment? Though they can feel insincere sometimes.
Sure, but even if we suspect we're being buttered up, it still triggers a positive
It's
response.
like our brains are hardwired to appreciate that.
Exactly. So physical attractiveness, similarity, compliments, all these little levers to make us like someone more and ultimately say yes to their requests.
Yeah, okay, so it's not just about being a nice person. There are actual techniques people use. But that's liking. What about social proof?
Ah, social proof. Now that's a powerful one and a great place to pick up next time.
All right, so we're back and ready to dive into social proof. I feel like I already kind of get this one. Like when you see a huge line outside a restaurant,
Oh, yeah.
you automatically assume it must be amazing, right? Even if you'd never heard of it before.
That's social proof in action. We look to others, especially when we're uncertain.
It's like our brains are wired to think, well, if everyone else is doing it, it must be the right thing to do.
It's a shortcut, and it makes sense from a survival standpoint.
Right. Back in the day, if you saw a bunch of people running away from something,
You'd better run, too.
exactly, no time to overthink it. But in today's world, blindly following the crowd can get you into trouble.
Oh, absolutely. Cialdini has that really disturbing story about S. Brian Wilson, the protester who was run over by a train.
Oh yeah, that one was tough to read.
It shows how powerful and dangerous social proof can be. The train crew saw Wilson on the tracks, but they assumed someone else would stop him.
And no one did.
They were all looking to each other for cues. No one wanted to break from the group and be the one to act.
That's a stark reminder that we can't just blindly trust the crowd's judgment.
Right, and Cialdini outlines 3 conditions where social proof is especially potent. First, uncertainty. When we don't know what to do, we look to others.
Makes sense. If I'm at a fancy dinner and I'm not sure which fork to use, I'm going to be watching what everyone else is doing.
Exactly. And then there's the factor of the many. The more people we see doing something, the more swayed we are.
So that restaurant line, even more convincing if it's a really long line.
Exactly. And finally, there's similarity. We're more influenced by people we see as being like us.
So if I see a bunch of people my age buying a certain product, I'm more likely to be influenced than if it's a group of, say, senior citizens.
Exactly. We tend to trust people who we perceive as similar to ourselves.
So social proof, we got to be mindful of it. What about authority? We're taught to respect authority figures.
Right.
But, as we saw with Dylan Dan, appearances can be deceiving.
It's true, and Cialdini digs into how our respect for authority can be used against us. Do you remember those old Vicks Formula 44 commercials?
Oh, the one with the doctor?
Yes. He had no medical credentials.
But he looked the part. That white coat, all the medical jargon.
And it worked. Because those symbols of authority, titles, uniforms,
even things like luxury cars.
right, trigger this automatic deference in us.
It's like our brains are programmed to think, well, if they're in charge, they must know what they're doing.
And con artists know this. Think about those bank examiner scams.
Where they call you up, pretending to be from the bank and get you to transfer your money.
Exactly. People let their guard down because they believe they're talking to a legitimate authority.
So how do we protect ourselves from that kind of thing? Do we just question everyone's authority?
Well, it's a good place to start. Question credentials. Don't just blindly accept someone's authority because they have a title or wear a uniform.
To ask questions.
Right. Are you really an expert? What are your credentials? And also, assess their trustworthiness. Do they seem credible?
Okay, so be a critical thinker.
Yes. Don't take anything at face value.
And also, just because someone is in a position of authority doesn't mean you can't say no.
Absolutely. You always have a right to refuse a request, even if it comes from someone you respect or admire.
That's important to remember. You are in control of your choices. Okay, so we've talked about reciprocity, liking, social proof, and authority. Let's move on to scarcity. The idea that we want what we can't have.
Ah, yes, scarcity. Another incredibly powerful principle, and one that marketers use all the time.
Oh, for sure, like limited time offers and going out of business sales.
Exactly. They create that sense of urgency. But it's not just about that. Scarcity also increases something's perceived value.
So it's like if something is rare or hard to get, we assume it must be better.
Exactly. It's like that classic experiment Cialdini talks about with the cookies, the ones in the almost empty jar.
We're rated as more desirable, even though they were the exact same cookies.
Right, just because they were scarce. And this ties into psychological reactance.
Reactance, what's that?
It's our tendency to want what we're told we can't have, like a rebellious instinct that kicks in when our freedom is restricted.
Haha. So like a toddler who wants to touch everything you tell them not to.
Exactly. And it doesn't go away as we get older. Think about those limited edition products, exclusive deals.
They're playing on that, making us feel like we need to have it before it's gone.
Precisely. Now think about information. Information can become more desirable when it's censored or restricted.
Oh, right, like banned books often become bestsellers.
Exactly. People want what they're not supposed to have. And as Cialdini points out, we value things that have become recently scarce, even more than things that have always been scarce.
Interesting. So something that was readily available but suddenly becomes scarce.
Seems even more valuable.
That's fascinating. Okay, so scarcity creates this illusion of value, triggers our reactance. Anything else we need to know?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this principle, like all the others, can be used ethically or unethically.
That's a good point.
It's all about intent. A company might genuinely have a limited supply of a product, or they might be artificially creating scarcity to drive up demand.
So buyer beware.
Always a good rule of thumb. All right, so we've covered quite a bit of ground here. Reciprocity, liking, social proof, authority, scarcity. We're really getting a sense of how these principles can be used to influence our decisions.
It's a little overwhelming. Like now I feel like I'm going to be second guessing every decision I make, wondering if someone's trying to manipulate me.
I understand that feeling, but remember, knowledge is power.
Right.
By understanding these principles, you can become more aware of when they're being used on you, and ultimately make more conscious and informed decisions.
So it's not about becoming paranoid. It's about being informed.
Exactly, and trusting your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
Okay, trust my gut. Got it.
Yeah.
But even with all this knowledge, I mean, some people are just master persuaders, right?
It's true, some people are really skilled at using these principles. But even then, there are things you can do to protect yourself.
Like what?
Remember what we talked about with authority. Question everything. Do your research. Get a second opinion, and if something feels wrong, trust your instincts.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So while Cialdini is revealing all these sneaky levers of influence, this deep dive has actually been really empowering
I'm glad to hear that.
because it's given us the tools to spot those tactics and make more conscious choices. And that's ultimately what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. It's about taking back control of your decisions and not letting yourself be swayed by unconscious biases or manipulative tactics.
I love that. So we've covered 5 of Cialdini's principles. Is there one more?
There is. And it's a fascinating one. Unity. It goes beyond liking or similarity.
Oh, I'm intrigued. We're definitely going to have to unpack that one. All right, so we're back. And I am super curious about this last principle, unity. You were saying it's even deeper than liking or similarity.
It is. Unity taps into the sense of we-ness, like a shared identity, belonging to the same group.
Okay, so more than just liking someone, it's about feeling like you're part of the same tribe.
Exactly. Like you're on the same team, working towards a common goal. And when we feel that sense of unity, we're just way more susceptible to persuasion.
Right, like if someone makes you feel like you're in their inner circle.
Yes. You're going to trust them more, be more likely to follow their lead.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what creates that feeling of unity?
Well, Cialdini highlights a few things. One of the biggest ones is kinship.
Family.
Of course.
Yeah.
We have this natural sense of unity with our family members.
Yeah, like that goes without saying.
Right. But that feeling of kinship can extend beyond our immediate family.
Oh, I see.
Extended family, close friends, even our hometown. Or our country.
So like those hometown pride campaigns are tapping into that?
They could be. Trying to create a connection, that sense of we're from the same place, we share the same values.
And political campaigns probably use that too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Emphasize shared values, maybe a candidate's local roots, things like that, to connect with voters.
So it's kind of playing on that us versus them mentality.
Not necessarily in a bad way. It's more about highlighting shared identities, common goals. We're all in this together.
Right. Okay. So kinship, that's one thing. What else builds that unity?
Shared experiences, going through something together, whether it's good or bad, creates a bond.
Oh, yeah, like going through boot camp together?
Exactly. Creates this intense shared experience forges a strong sense of unity, or even something like, think about sports fans.
Oh, yeah.
That shared experience of cheering for the same team, especially during a close game.
Oh, I've totally felt that, like high-fiving complete strangers.
Yes. It's instant camaraderie.
So, shared experiences,
Mm.
that makes sense.
What else?
Co-creation. When people work together to create something, it builds unity.
So, like, if I get my kids involved in making dinner.
They might be more likely to eat it
Yeah.
because they helped make it, they feel ownership,
I like that.
and it works in the workplace too.
Makes sense.
If you get employees involved in decision-making, they're more likely to buy in because they helped create the solution.
So you're all working towards a common goal.
Exactly. And that sense of unity is powerful stuff.
Okay, so we've seen how unity can be used for persuasion, but can it ever be, harmful?
That's a good question. And unfortunately, yes, we've seen throughout history how unity can be exploited.
Like, I'm thinking of propaganda. Yes. Creating a sense of national unity to rally support for war. Or cults. They use techniques like isolation and shared rituals.
To create that intense feeling of unity.
Right. Which can make members more vulnerable to the leader's influence.
So like all of Cialdini's principles, unity is a tool that can be used for good or for bad.
It all comes down to intention and awareness, recognizing the power of unity and being cautious of situations where it might be used to manipulate us.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about how persuasion works and honestly how to protect myself from it too.
I'm glad to hear that. That's what we were hoping for.
It's a little bit scary realizing how easily we could be influenced. But knowledge is power, right?
It really is. Now that you're aware of these principles, you can spot them in action and make more conscious choices.
And not just be a pawn in someone else's game.
Exactly.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into influence, the psychology of persuasion.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
It really has. Cialdini's book is so insightful, and I highly recommend it to everyone listening.
It's a must-read.
But even more than reading the book, I think the most important takeaway is to be aware, to pay attention to the subtle ways that we're being influenced every day, and to use that knowledge to make more conscious, informed choices.
Absolutely.
So that wraps it up for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious out there.